Reducing the world's carbon footprint is one of the major issues facing corporate worlds today and individuals, and it's one of the main topics of the INSEAD 22nd Alumni Sustainability Executive Roundtable. And with us right now are Dirk Hendricks, who is the Director of the EU Liaison Office of the Foundation World Future Council. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And Henry Derwent, he is the President and CEO of the International Emissions Trading Association. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be here.
Let me ask both of you, perhaps we can start with you, Dirk. The global economic crisis has made it difficult for some countries to keep their carbon quotas. Everybody's assigned to it because they don't have the time to change. They just have to keep doing what they can to make money. Italy, for example, has signaled a problem. Poland and Lithuania have renegotiated their way out of it. Is this going to kind of delay any kind of carbon footprint reduction?
Well, there's a possibility for it. Now, I guess if you're going to look at the overall EU target in particular, I guess that these three countries play certainly a role, but I guess it is it can be still sort of like caught by the performance of the other countries, mainly the other big countries within the EU, such as UK, Germany, France, and Spain, for example.
They're not renegotiating their quotas.
No, they are not renegotiating the quotas. But I mean, there's still a possibility that they are producing more. I mean, some countries might do that. But I mean, of course, I mean, like for example, when it comes to Poland, I mean, definitely coal in Poland is in particular a very big issue there. But I mean, what I would hope for is that these countries take the possibility of implementing new technologies and the new opportunities that renewable energies, energy efficiency measures take in order for job creation and to get out of a crisis. So to see it more as a chance or as a tool to get out of the crisis than rather than a burden to keep in the crisis.
So a source of job creation because
Absolutely.
of a new, really a new industry for which there's government money.
Exactly.
Does that make sense to you to try to kind of refocus some of the emphasis there?
Very much so. I think that industry across the whole of Europe and across the whole of the world is going to have to start taking very seriously the need to focus on lower carbon activities, lower carbon products, lower carbon strategies. Because even if the price of carbon across the world is only visible in certain places and is at levels which don't affect all that many of the choices that companies have to make, this is merely the early signs of something which is going to come increasingly to dominate the world economy over the next 20, 30 years as people start seeing how climate change is affecting their lives and start worrying about the disasters that I'm sure we will have more of and start worrying about their children's lives as well. They are going to find that governments respond to voters by increasing, by twisting the knife, by tightening the knot, however you like to look at it. And if you haven't thought about that before it happens as a business, you're in trouble.
Henry, what is your role in the International Emissions Trading Association in reducing the carbon footprint or in finding alternative energy forms?
Well, we are a trade association of private companies who have committed to emissions trading and carbon pricing as the most cost-effective way of achieving emissions reduction, the way which avoids decisions and choices made by governments who often get them wrong, the approach which puts the market at the centre of a response to something which is essentially very simple. The atmosphere wants less carbon going into it. There's lots and lots of ways in which we as human beings achieve that. We want to reduce it at the lowest cost possible, so it makes sense for the market to be used as a tool to identify the most cost-effective ways of doing it. And that's essentially what we do. We lobby governments, we provide information to our members, we provide information to the world.
So what has your market model told you about the way the world is going, say, in the last year? Because it seems to have been skewed quite differently in the last year.
Good things and bad things. The good thing, of course, is that the United States has come on board with the notion that emissions reduction, and particularly a cap and trade scheme, in other words, the establishment of a carbon price, is a really important part of their policy. At the same time, we've seen Australia changing around. We seem to be seeing Japan as well going in the same area. I could spend some time listing some of the other countries which have gone in the same direction. The disappointment, I think, has been that just recently, particularly in the United States, but also in Australia, we've seen a fight back by interests who either don't believe in the climate change thing at all or have very good short-term commercial interests for not wanting to make the moves that, frankly, the rest of the world and their government would need them to make.
I want to come back to the non-believers in climate change in a minute, but you've mentioned something here about the short term. I mean, the World Future Council, Dirk, kind of tackles longer term issues, but all of a sudden climate change has become an issue du jour.
Exactly.
So how are you adjusting your mechanism to deal with this?
Well, I mean, what we are doing is giving advice to policymakers in several countries, in international organizations, on how to implement best policies, and to do that as fast as possible by giving them the relevant tools to do so, by giving them the relevant information, and show them what they can do in the respective means. I give you an example. We had a number of roundtables with parliamentarians where we give them the background information, give them the possibilities, in particular with feed-in tariffs as a sort of like kind of silver bullet in order to favor a very quick deployment of renewable energy sources, and to tell them how they can implement that in their country, and also to provide a sort of like platform through which they can communicate with each other, so that not each country is reinventing the wheel by itself, but basically learning from region to region. Also, like, for example, having regular telephone conferences or video conferences between the big centers where currently the major changes are going on, and that is Washington, D.C., Brussels, and also, for example, New Delhi. One way of reducing the carbon footprint is to change gasoline into electricity. There's been a lot, electric cars are now very popular, all kinds of development. What's this going to do to the demand for electricity? Is it going to, are we kind of going from the frying pan into the fire here, or what? Well, if you do it in the wrong way, definitely. Because when you talk in particular about transportation, and if you're going to talk about changing all cars in electric vehicles or so on, then it only makes sense if you produce this electricity by renewable energy. If you produce it by conventional energy, then you just increase CO2 in the atmosphere by that. So this is something that only makes sense if you do it in this way. And then in addition to that is you have already existing means. It's not only promoting, for example, renewable energy, but I mean it's also promoting energy efficiency and energy saving. I'm not quite exactly sure if you can request or demand people to make significant changes in their lifestyle. But I mean what you can do is you can say there is a certain adaptation, but you do it in a much smarter way. That means that you use much energy in order to have still a similar or the same lifestyle. And I guess that is possible with the technology, with innovation that we have, and with just the possibilities to make a difference and use the resources, in particular the renewable resources that are indefinite there, and put them into place. You worried about the demand for electricity, or do you think there's enough alternative, sustainable forms of energy to create it? I am worried about it. There is obviously a reasonable case to be made that it's easier to substitute stationary electricity generation with non-carbon intensive forms than it is to substitute all those little combustion plants which go around on four wheels around the place. It's not impossible to find different ways of propelling those individual modes of transport, but we're probably further along the track in substituting the fossil fuels burnt in power stations. But of course there is an enormous infrastructure change necessary to cope with a world where large quantities of electricity from stationary power stations has to be got into mobile units running around all the place.
And the changes to the grid, the changes to the infrastructure, the additional power stations that are going to be necessary are something which will give the whole world a lot to chew over for a long time. But the alternative is essentially cracking down on personal mobility to an extent that, however much you might think the atmosphere and the earth might be crying out for it, it's just not going to be delivered politically, either in developed countries or developing countries. So you've got to find some way forward. At the moment, I certainly think that the advances on electric-powered or electric-supplemented vehicles are worth starting to take those decisions about the infrastructure to support them.
How do carbon constraints actually affect our society? Sort of, maybe not so much on the social level, but politically, in terms of corporations?
Here in Europe, the way that they affect us most of all is through the price of carbon, which has been established by the European Emissions Trading Scheme, which essentially means that energy-intensive companies throughout Europe, particularly the power sector, but also certain heavy industries as well, have a strong incentive, which they didn't have before, to reduce their carbon. And that can lead to a number of things. It can lead to increases in the prices for the home market of the products. It can lead them to start thinking sensibly about how to avoid those costs by going to different products or different approaches to manufacture. But of course, when it's only one part of the world which is doing this, and there are still imports coming in or attempts at export going out to countries which do not price carbon in this sort of way, then you have a competitive imbalance which is created. And you have to be prepared to defend one way or the other your, as it were, with carbon price economy or region from simply losing jobs and business to the rest of the world. There are ways of doing that. The best of them is to persuade all other countries to come with you as quickly as possible.
Dirk, in terms of policymakers, because this has to be supported literally by the political will and by policy. How do you get them to look for the sort of the low carbon footprint or the carbon cap policy or anything that would lead towards a more sustainable environment? What do you need to do?
Basically, information and education is the key. First of all, informing them what are the alternatives if they do not act. There you come into costs. What you can do is even if you take a very conservative scenario on how the climate might change, or something that you have already right now, the point is you have costs that can be avoided in the future if you do the relevant investments nowadays. So this is number one. The second thing is to also highlight that there is, if you want to, that long-term decisions or decisions also for the future of humanity or of future generations are necessary to do. So this is a sort of like moral or ethic component that comes then in addition to that. And then third, in particular, also to show that there are a lot of benefits involved, like, for example, that by, for example, installing feed-in tariffs, that you can create a lot of jobs, that you can create a lot of additional wealth for the society, that you can create new businesses. So based on a macro and microeconomic level, you will have quite a lot of advantages by looking into this sector. And therefore, it is good for their constituencies and for them as politicians.
And we will leave it there. That's been an interesting prelude here for what will be a much longer discussion, I'm sure. Dirk and Henry, thank you both very much for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Not at all.
Thank you.